Recording in progress.
All right, that's the sound we're looking for. We will call this qathet Regional District Planning Committee to order here, Tuesday, March 24th already. I can't believe it. Time is just flying on by. Um, our first order of business is approval of the agenda. We have one in front of us. Can I have a mover? Thank you, Director McCormick and Director Brander. Any discussion on the proposed agenda? Seeing no hands, all those in favor? Thank you. That's unanimous. That's carried. We're on to adoption of the minutes. Any errors or omissions from February 24th? Seeing no hands, can I have a mover? Thank you, Director Brander and Director Gisborne. Any discussion on the minutes? All those in favor? Thank you. That's carried unanimously. Do we have a delegation at all there? Corporate officer, any delegations? Nope. Thank you. No unfinished business, no correspondence, unusual, and no business arriving, some such. We're on to 8.1. So we have a housing capacity analysis final report. Do we have staff any presentation? I see we do have a presentation. Is that just from staff, corporate officer, or is that?
Oh, thank you. Yes, so Laura Rodden and Julia Dijkstra are here, as well as the consultant to provide the presentation.
Great. Well, I will let them do so.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to make a short introduction and set the context for this study. So between October 2025 and March 2026, qathet Regional District staff have been working with Liquor Geospatial Consulting to complete a housing capacity analysis. And staff involved have included planning staff as well as GIS staff and asset management and emergency services. So we had a holistic view of the data from the regional district's perspective. And the purpose of the project has been to improve our understanding of the region's capacity for residential growth under the existing official community plans and zoning bylaws. And funding for the project was covered through the BC Housing Capacity Initiative grant in its entirety. And this grant funding was provided by the province to support local governments and their compliance with requirements established under the Local Government Act to adopt a proactive and long-term approach to planning and for local governments to identify 5-year and 20-year housing needs and ensure that their land use bylaws support housing growth to meet those needs. And so to meet these requirements, the regional district has completed 2 studies over the last 2 years. So the housing needs report was completed at the end of 2024, and it identifies projected 5-year and 20-year housing needs for each of the electoral areas. And now this qathet Regional District Housing Capacity Analysis forecasts the capacity for future housing growth for each of the electoral areas. And so today we have Renee Proulx from Liquor Geospatial Consulting, and she's with us to present the report and its findings and to respond to any questions the directors have about the study and the findings.
Great. Well, I guess we'll welcome Renee, and I can't see anybody there, so I'll assume we're going to share the presentation.
Hi there.
Hi.
Thank you for that introduction, Laura. My name is Renee, and I'm a senior project manager at Liquor Geospatial, and I was one of the project manager and the analyst on the housing capacity analysis that we recently completed. And I'm really excited to show you all what we learned. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Unfortunately, you all kind of disappear. So if anyone has any questions,
I completely understand. It's the same for me.
yeah, thank you. Okay, so a little bit about ADJOURNMENT. We are a 16-person data-oriented consultancy, and we're located in Vancouver, BC. We provide analysis and decision support for 50+ local governments in BC, and we've done a lot of these housing capacity projects. We've just completed it in your district, and now we have also worked with, for example, the Capital Regional District, the Cowichan Valley, several projects on the island, Vancouver, etc. So many housing capacity projects across BC. Our entire company's primary mission is to leverage spatial data to improve quality of life in our communities. The housing capacity analysis process can be kind of broken down into 4 main chunks. So the first part of the process is to analyze current state. So what is the existing stock? So we take a look at building information reports and parcel information, and we analyze what kind of units are available, how many, where are they located, parcel size, UPH, all that fun stuff. Then our next step is to contextualize the parcels. So what other information is available to describe the housing that currently exists? That includes things like land use from the OCP, what kind of constraints would be applied to that parcel, things like steep slopes or riparian areas, and then servicing. Are these lots serviced by water, sewer, both? All of that information was kind of consolidated into one data set, which is the parcel data set. Then next, we take all that information and we analyze redevelopment potential. So how desirable is a parcel, or how likely is it to redevelop? So we look at, again, more kind of criteria like servicing, its size, and potential subdividability, and then a couple other factors that go in to analyzing redevelopment potential. Then we do capacity analysis. So we have 3 different scenarios: absolute, relative, and realizable. And we analyze what kind of housing capacity could exist under those 3 scenarios, which I will explain in a minute. Something that I do want to say is that QRD staff's input and knowledge was so critical to the process, and we were consulting with staff at every single step. So we took the current state and we said, does this make sense? And then when we were contextualizing the parcels, we wanted to know what constraints are most applicable in your region, and redevelopment potential. We couldn't do that without understanding what staff's view and knowledge of what is redeveloping in the area. We couldn't have done it without that input. So thank you for everyone's time. So as mentioned, we have 3 different capacity analyses, and I'm just going to run through what those 3, what they kind of represent. So absolute capacity is kind of what the name implies, the theoretical maximum. So we're saying under current land use policy, what is the maximum that could be built on each parcel? So when we're looking at subdivisions, we'll use the minimum parcel size, and then we consider complete and partial development constraints. So there are kind of some limitations on development, but otherwise we are building to the theoretical maximums. That leads us to about 10,400 units for the entire region. Then we look at relative capacity. So this is still considering all unconstrained land for development, but it adds a little bit more conservatism by applying average parcel size to the subdivision. So that outcome is about 8,750 units. Then we look at realizable capacity, and realizable capacity, it takes a bit more of that kind of consideration of what is more likely to happen. It uses that redevelopment potential. So this only assumes that lots with high redevelopment potential will see new capacity in the near future. So that brings us to about 1,575 units. So the current state is that there are currently 4,425 dwelling units in the QRD under 19 different residential land use types. So you can see here the current housing and then how that is split up via different areas. So we see Area C and Savary Island have presently the most housing units. Okay, and then This graph is showing us the three different capacity analyses. So I kind of mentioned that absolute capacity is kind of the theoretical maximum, and then we apply some filters to kind of replicate realism, and that gets us down to realizable capacity. So regionally, absolute capacity is reduced by 16% when compared to relative capacity as a result of the more conservative subdivision. And then realizable capacity is further reduced by 82% when only land that's likely to develop is considered. So we can see once under the realizable scenario that the highest kind of capacity growth is expected in area A, followed by area D. If we all add this all together, regionally, the capacity for new units is 36% greater than the current number of units. And our current total, as I mentioned, around 4,000, the total realizable 1,576, and then all in all, that becomes about 6,000 units. So in this graph, you can see the darker color is the current housing units, and then the lighter color on top would be what would be added under the realizable capacity scenario. So some assumptions and limitations. Obviously, this is for starters based on BC assessment data. So we are relying on BC assessment to tell us what units are presently there. Sometimes this information isn't 100% reflective of what is going on the ground, but it is, you know, the best data available for what kind of housing is available. And then also the future assumptions are dependent on market conditions. What we're saying makes for a desirable makes for a desirable kind of development or a high redevelopment score is dependent on market conditions. So this is predicted, not necessarily guaranteed growth, and would be subject, if things change, to potentially adapting how redevelopment is assessed. But the key takeaways are that statutory land use entitlements, so the current OCP, allows for significant capacity, though much of that is undevelopable. And the realizable capacity, when we add kind of that realism element, does meet current targets for projected 20-year need. Much of that capacity is coming from secondary units. So we do see about 338 units coming from subdivisions on currently vacant properties, but the vast majority of growth is coming from secondary suites. Furthermore, growth is clustered in existing serviced areas and in large vacant lots near Highway 101. Okay, so then the exciting part would be potential next steps. Laura did mention, you know, how this fits into all of the housing related planning currently underway, but this is a really great inventory of what housing is available and what could potentially be changing in the region. So this data can be used to guide future planning decisions. So detailed infrastructure planning work can definitely lean on this research. Exploring land use policy updates to guide or induce mindful growth based on, you know, what the data is showing us for growth hotspots, and scenario type planning for high potential areas. So looking at where redevelopment scores are higher and understanding what kind of planning would be most mindful in that area. The data can also be used for other value-added purposes like emergency planning, kind of predicting where there will be further demand for emergency services, climate adaptation, and then just other forms of growth and change analysis. Really, there are a lot of opportunities here. And so I just want to say thank you. We're going to be updating this map soon, where we can kind of add this project on top of the existing work we've done in the region. And I really appreciate your time. I'd love to answer your questions. Okay, so my email is renee@lgo.co, but you can also email Aaron. The principal of the firm, unfortunately, was affected by that big windstorm that's currently happening and lost power. So he was meant to be giving this presentation. So I apologize for that not being updated, but feel free to reach out to either Aaron or I in the future, but I'm also here to answer questions right now. So thank you.
Great. Well, Thank you, Renee, and I'm lucky to have kept power. It's starting to mellow out now here in Lund, but I appreciate your presentation. And I didn't say sorry for the delay. We had a couple of meetings go late, so really thank you for sticking around with us to do the presentation. I'm going to open it up to directors for questions, although it's hard for me to see. So directors, put your hand up if you have questions, please. I'm going to be looking for you here. I see Director Gisborne. We'll start with you.
Sure, I'll bite. So my first question is, and thanks for the presentation. I love details. I love data. And of course, one of the things that pops up is, you can really only analyze the data that you have. And of course, up here, we don't have like building permits and a lot of regulations. So quite often it's like, what's going on? Not really sure. My first question is, I took a look back at the 2024 housing needs assessment, and it showed Area B as having 908 dwelling units, but on the presentation, it shows Area B as only having 700 units. And I'm just wondering, is that discrepancy, with BC assessment, or maybe they're like RVs, which might show up as being a dwelling unit, but wouldn't show up on the assessment? And I'm just wondering, it's 200 units is kind of a big difference.
Yeah, that is pretty impactful. To my understanding, RVs and kind of mobile homes are included in the BIR, which is the source for this information. But obviously not all would be included, right? Like it depends on kind of the property. Usually those are kind of residential mobile home parks that get included. That could be a source of the difference. Be happy to look into that. But this is correct based on the building information reports.
Oh, okay. And I think I saw our manager of planning services raise her hand and maybe.
Oh, thank you. Mr.
Yes.
Auden, do you have a comment?
The chair, yeah, I'd just like to add on to what Renee said in that, the housing needs assessment used census data, and the census doesn't count like RVs as dwelling units. So that could be one of the things contributing to the difference, but I can also look into it on my end and provide some follow-up information.
Great.
Census does, yeah.
Yeah, because it's, Area B is well, I'm sure it's similar to a lot of other areas, but in the housing needs assessment from 2024, it showed that Area B had, I think, over 300 non-conventional housing types, which was like the lion's share of non-conventional housing types. And, they don't necessarily show up everywhere, but if you drive around, you'll find them. So it's how to, how does the data come together is curious. So no, thanks for manager of planning services to find out more.
I'll add definitely something to further investigate, that the census focuses on people from a household perspective, whereas this assessment focuses more on the structure. So there can be discrepancies if there are multiple units in a household that aren't necessarily known to BC assessment. But
Thank you. Okay, I think even though Director McCormick is clapping, I think she did enjoy your presentation. I think it's her hand. She's trying to ask a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. It might be better if you got rid of the presentation, then we could see each other. I really found the housing capacity analysis really interesting. I'm sorry, I'm croaking like a Kermit the Frog. But especially Area D, where you recommend that there's a lot of capacity for growth. Interestingly, when we've just been through our budget process, Area D is the one area that went down in assessed value, property value, throughout the region. And I'm just wondering how big an influence are economic factors and other things that would influence the capacity for growth, but decrease the perhaps likelihood of that. So my question is, do you consider other things like economics and other influences on population growth?
Thank
like
you, Renee. Does marketplace and listing price come into it? I think I saw some information on your slide.
So listing prices do not come into it per se, but we do look at essentially the gap between, like, if there is a higher value land versus lower value structure, and it's in a well-placed area, that would potentially make it more desirable to redevelopment, right? That would make someone more incentivized to purchase and maybe build a new structure on that. So that is a way in which we analyze economics. But in the process of how many units we'll develop, no, what we do is we consider the top 20% of desirable, redevelopable, or developable land. So yes, in an economic downturn, likely less buildings perhaps would be developed in the sense of we'd get large subdivisions. However, I do think that in times of, economic downturn, some things like developing a secondary suite or an accessory dwelling become more desirable. So I do think it's really hard to kind of analyze the specifics, but I will note that much of this growth is more in the accessory dwelling, which I think is a bit more resilient to economic change. Yes, but to answer your question, unfortunately, no, we are not kind of forecasting an economic model for how redevelopment may occur, but we are considering the likelihood.
Okay. Director McCormick, you have a follow-up?
Yeah, follow up. Yeah, thank you. People are using RVs. I'm sorry. People are using RVs as secondary suites, buying RVs, parking them, and then renting them. Are you counting RVs, or do you not count any RVs anywhere?
If the RV is registered as like a legal suite, then it would be counted.
It's text data, not likely.
So, I guess, how would I put this? For the future growth, it's necessarily saying what it will be, but it would have to be kind of a registered unit. But that is an interesting factor, is if a lot of people are adding capacity on their own lots by purchasing an RV, that is kind of a form of the growth that we're talking about, is that the majority of what we'll be likely seeing is concentrated in serviced areas, or alternatively in large lots that are along the highway.
Thank you.
All right, looking for any other hands? Director Brander, any, I don't see your hand. You're pretty small, but I don't see, okay. I'm going to actually step in. Thank you again for your presentation. A few thoughts and a couple of questions. You answered, Ms. Rodden answered about the cost and that we got a grant. So that was good. And that it is about compliance. We're required to do some of this work. Obviously, Lund stands out. That's where I'm sitting right here on I guess, a technically realizable property, but it does make us, it's a good thing to consider. What does it take to actually get that work done? Water, sewer, room to expand these systems that we have. I'm not, I think it's really, we have some limitations, even though those heat maps show Lund Central here is pretty high. I actually appreciate the difference in what is realizable, because one of my islands up in Desolation Sound is heat mapped as a high potential for subdivision.
Talking about Mink Island.
Yes, I wasn't going to single the Mink Islanders out because they'll get worried, but I know there's potential, but I mean the reality. So I appreciate your explanation on that. I actually hadn't thought that secondary suites probably were part of what that capacity is, and I've built myself one as well, but I'm just going to let my family live here. But I think that's important for us to consider. It's not just subdividing; it's using those other means on our properties, and really incentives to actually densify, and what those are. If there are any incentives in this day and age. So I'm not so sure there's a high likelihood of redevelopment in a lot of these places, but they are desirable. So I was looking at some of the comments versus desirability versus likelihood. And the cost of living and affordability is becoming an issue out here. And so that, again, we thinking about what kind of communities we're creating. You identified next steps on page 4 of 87 there in my numbers. So I appreciate that. I don't have it in front of me again, but actually I'll just pop it up for myself. Sorry, folks, I just wanted to take 2 seconds here. There it is. And just look at what those next steps could be. Maybe you could comment on those while I'm looking.
Sorry, is the question to comment on the next steps?
Yes, please. Yes.
Yeah, so you were kind of discussing capacity, right? Like Lund specifically desirable from a redevelopment standpoint because there is that connection to servicing and is well located. So something that might be like a good use of this information is to kind of explore land use policy updates or infrastructure planning for that area, to be able to kind of consider, is this a good spot to be putting future capacity, and whether or not the infrastructure, needs to be invested in, or if there needs to be any expansions to accommodate that. So detailed infrastructure planning work would probably be very relevant. Yeah, I think that this information is a really good baseline for understanding what housing is available and where the areas that we're seeing growth and how we're seeing growth happen. And then to reassess year over year, right? Like this is awesome. It's an awesome kind of current state and future state to come back to in 5 years, in 10 years, see what's happened, what's changed, and do that kind of planning to understand future growth. It's always good to kind of have this data and information to look back on. So I view this as a good kind of stepping stone for updating growth and change analysis year over year. And then, like you mentioned, Lund infrastructure, that's super important.
Yeah, and maybe you've just, thank you, Renee. You've reminded me that, and for the other directors, this actually supports our work, with Lund Water and trying to, get to the point where that's a sustainable long-term system for increased users. And actually, I appreciated your points on Savary. There is no more room for density on Savary with our 50-foot lots, and I'm glad you didn't include the bottle shape to should be actually dead-ended for Savary. So appreciate your presentation. Any other questions? I don't want to look and see here. Director Gisborne.
Yeah, I'll take a second kick at the can. One of the questions that comes up in my mind when I first read this is there's a lot of reference to like number of parcels, subdivisions, and so just to clarify, I live on ALR, and I've always been kind of confused as to why why when you create more parcels you somehow get more housing. And I'm wondering, is that when it comes down to say official community plans or zoning bylaws where it's one dwelling per parcel and then one ADU, is that kind of where that, if you get more parcels, you can get more dwellings because the zoning bylaw kind of restricts you on how many you can do? Is that where I'm kind of reading that from?
Yes. So this doesn't also, Laura, if you'd prefer to answer this, please cut me off. But essentially, well, ALR, this would not apply because ALR has very different regulations. But in a large parcel that is zoned for rural residential, there is both a minimum and average parcel size. And so there can be an application made to subdivide so that you can put one it's two, typically one unit or one dwelling, but then it would have an accessory dwelling or secondary suite. So 2 units per parcel. That is generally the land use policy that's laid out. So that is why you would see subdivision of a large vacant parcel. But those have application processes, but they are the size of the final subdivision would be regulated by the land use policy.
Okay, and I see our planner has a hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'll just add to that, one of the constraints to redevelopment is the lack of water and sewer servicing in the electoral areas. So the heat maps show that there's more capacity in Lund because there's water and sewer, and the provincial regulations and policies are that a 1 hectare minimum parcel size unless you have water and sewer servicing, right? So it's all tied to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I got a follow-up. So at this table, we passed a motion around ALR that's going to ABICC about, the total accumulative floor area for ALR. And I know this assessment doesn't cover that. But I noticed some local governments are like redefining density from like the number of dwelling units per hectare or per acre to kind of like a floor area model. Do you find like what kind of impact does that have on the assessments when it's kind of like you can have as many dwellings as you want, but you can only, go so large in terms of lot coverage? Does that like how does that change your analysis? And do you have any examples of some communities where that's kind of shown up?
Ms. Proulx, any comments?
I haven't personally done any analysis where we don't operate off of number of units, but we're rather operating off of like a total floor area to a maximum number of units. That would be quite challenging to model because I wonder what the balance between maximizing size, like what is the minimum size that someone would desire to build in that context. But in theory, that is something that we could apply with the data that we have assembled, right? Because we generally do have that information for structures, and we could be modeling or even testing a similar policy on ALR. But I generally do think that in the area, the desirability of many tiny homes, for example, on a large lot, I don't see that being necessarily the most desirable from like a financial or like a resident perspective. So yeah, I'd have to think about that a little bit more. I guess my answer is no, I have not personally done that, but it is possible from the standpoint of the data that we've assembled to model such a policy and see how that would impact growth.
Thank you very much. Sorry for like such an outlandish question. It's one that's been like kind of burning in the back of my mind, and it was just thank you very much for that answer. I know it's a weird question. Thank you.
All good. Thank you.
Yeah, and I appreciate your acknowledgement of our staff as well, because obviously they do a lot of work to fill in the blanks in a very unregulated area. So. Seeing no other hands or questions, thank you for your presentation, and we're going to let you go and take care of business.
Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Appreciate you. So, directors, really, we just have a motion to accept this report. So, can I have a mover to do so? Director Gisborne, I see your hand. Director Brander, seconded. Any other discussion? I think we've had a good. Okay, Director Gisborne.
Yeah, just one question. I guess it's mainly for our staff. And I heard this was covered by a grant. I hear it's provincially required. And I'm just wondering, like, how frequently are we going to have to update these? Of course, how the province, they give you a grant first and then they want you to update it and they don't give any money the second time.
How long can we delay, Ms. Rodden?
Through the chair, there's no requirement to update the report. This is for our own purposes, and actually with the detailed methodology in the study, it will be possible for our GIS staff here at the regional district to track and monitor change over time.
Okay.
Great. Okay. Well, I think we'll put it to the vote. All those in favor of accepting the report? That's unanimous. That's carried. Thank you. And thank you for the presentation. Sorry, folks. Let me just go back to my agenda here. Okay, we're going to move on to 8.2. We do have a subdivision application before us. So this is in Area C, Highway 101. We have some the recommendations to support this with several of our usual conditions. So can I have a mover? Director Brander, seconded. Director Gisborne, discussion. All right, not seeing any hands. I had a good look at it. And again, these are our normal provisions and 2 big lots being subdivided. So into 2 big lots. So and seeing no other questions, I'll put it to the vote. All those in favor? That's unanimous. It's carried. Thank you. No new business. Question period. Mr. Galinsky.
Yes, Mr. Galinsky is here, Chair. Thank you very much. Everything seems pretty straightforward. Thanks for the opportunity to pose a question.
Thank you, sir. Any other questions, gallery or online? Seeing none, we do have a proposed closed session. Can I have a mover? Director Gisborne. I need a secondary, Director Brander. Any discussion on this? Seeing none, all those in favor? That's carried unanimously. We are going in camera.
Recording in progress.
All right, we are back from our in-camera session. We have no rise and report. This meeting is adjourned. Good day, everybody.
Good, everyone.